Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Film Buzz, where today I went ahead and checked out the latest and quote unquote final entry to the Conjuring franchise, The Conjuring Last Rites, where we once again follow Ed and Lorraine Warren taking on one of their most personal and final supernatural cases and aiding the Smurls family in Pennsylvania, who have all recently come in contact with paranormal activity, while the Warrens also being accompanied by their daughter Judy, who has now stepped into the spotlight to help her parents in solving this case. And now, without further ado, let's get into the spoiler-free review of The Conjuring Last Rites. So, the Conjuring franchise as a whole has always been one of my guilty pleasure horror movie franchises. If you even classify these sort of paranormal movies as horror, and not because they're bad or anything, it's just that these movies are kind of just so formulaic and repetitive to a certain point where they're following a formula and using the oldest tricks in the book to get a cheap jump scare out of you. You know what I'm talking about, right? Those cliche horror movie tropes where we're suddenly following a character with an overhead shoulder shot, and then our character we're following either stops or does something stupid. You know, stereotypical horror movie scenario tropes. Which then the music builds up and crescendos into a cheap jump scare you can see a mile away. But other than that, movie pet peeve of mine, I kinda just watch these movies for the characters and the journey they go through, since at this point, I become very attached to Ed and Lorraine Warren's characters that I kind of just want to see them interacting with each other than the actual plot of the movie that is being unveiled itself. Which now segues us into the positives I have about the movie, because I was actually quite surprised with how this quote unquote final entry into the Conjuring universe turned out. So, The Conjuring Last Rites, as I previously mentioned before, follows Ed and Lorraine Warren alongside their daughter Judy in helping the Smurls family in Pennsylvania, where they recently came in contact with an evil entity from a recently purchased mirror that the grandpa character brought for her granddaughter as a gift for now being a member of the Catholic Church and being baptized, which underneath has a long and dark secret connection to the Warrens long before they started their careers as paranormal investigators. That's directly linked with their daughter Judy, which up to this point has been kind of this background character that has been sidelined a lot throughout the franchise. But getting back on topic with my positives I have about the movie is, I think I kind of always enjoyed the B plots in the franchise way more than the main plot of the story itself. This time around with the movie mostly revolving around building up the Warrens' relationship closer with their daughter throughout the movie, that eventually pays off near the end around the third act of the movie, which I'll get later into the video, but I think I just enjoy watching the Warrens interacting with one another and seeing the regular day-to-day basis as professors and retired paranormal investigators that are now looked at as some sort of joke, with them being deep into their careers, and then Warren specifically feeling like an old action character who's longing for the glory days, just waiting for any opportunity to once again come up to him, which is why Lorraine usually declines and neglects, which I guess was an acceptable way of getting the plot of the movie to move forward this time around. But other than that, I just really enjoyed the family dynamic between the core trio and even some of the new characters introduced. Ben Hardy's character of Tony, playing the love interest for Judy, which I kind of found cute and adorable in how they played his relationship with Judy and her parents, especially with Ed, which, my god, there's some funny scenes throughout the midpoint of the movie where Judy introduces Tony to her parents and how everyone is very welcoming and accepting him, even Lorraine approving of this relationship with her daughter, but of course, not Ed. Because of course, him still being this overprotective father figure to Judy, that still thinks of her as her little girl, which is actually very pivotal to the movie's plot, which I won't get into here because it's kind of a big plot point throughout the movie that keeps on coming up. But anyways, another thing you might be thinking is, will I have had to watch the previous Conjuring movies in order to understand this one? Yes, but no as well. Although yes, it does help watching all the previously released Conjuring films, including the spin-offs to further immerse you into this world, catch you up to date on things and how the characters ended up the way they are as of now. The movie still does a pretty good job at telling a self-sustained and pretty personal story that fills you in on all the previous movies in the franchise, all thanks to all the newer characters being introduced, and especially with Judy now being more of a prominent character this time around. Which now will be a good time to transition over to my negatives I had about the movie, which honestly are just a bunch of pet peeves I had about the movie and aren't really a deal breaker on whether or not to watch this movie, because at the end of the day, I felt like overall this was another solid entry into the Conjuring franchise and a satisfying conclusion to the Warrens' story. So let's get this one out of the way real quick. At this point, with 4 entries into the main Conjuring franchise, the horror movie tropes and stereotypes are kind of being really overplayed this time around. With the rinse and repeat formula of getting a cheap jump scare out of you, as I mentioned earlier before, with all the sound being cut off in the scene and our character where falling gets distracted by something, and then grabs their attention, then the camera pans away into a jump scare. You know what I mean. And this time around, I feel like they could have spaced them out a bit more evenly throughout the movie. Yeah, there's some creative sequences done throughout the movie, especially with the evil entity that the movie's plot revolves around with. But at the end of the day, we've all seen these sort of movie tropes time and time again to the point they're not as impactful as they used to be. Especially being 4 entries deep into the mainline Conjuring franchise. Another issue I had with the movie is the overall pacing of the movie, which at first the movie handles the first half of the movie pretty well, and being well paced, with it mostly being a flashback into the Warrens' early life, that later becomes a huge plot point of the movie, which I enjoyed. But as the movie kept on rolling and events unfolded, I felt like the movie dragged a lot throughout its runtime, especially near the second and third acts of the movie, which I felt like the movie was poorly paced with the third act of the movie only being 10% of the action movie and it being kind of rushed, but the movie's runtime overstaying its welcome, which mind you, the movie almost clocks in at 2.5 hours long. And that's all without saying how I felt like the screen time between the Smurls family and the Warrenses were kind of being split in half and then not really building up to that satisfying conclusion that you might think would have happened, all the plot points of the movie being built up throughout the runtime. But other than that, the characters in the actual movie were actually fine and fit nicely into the plot of the movie. I just wish that it was overall paced better since I really felt the movie's runtime throughout and getting bored fast around the second act of the movie. Which where once again I'll reiterate how messy this movie's pacing is and kinda ruins the vibe of the story for me. But in conclusion, is The Conjuring Last Rites worth watching? Yeah, I'd say it's worth giving it a watch. I'll be giving this a 7 out of 10. It's a bittersweet ending to the main Conjuring franchise that nicely ends up wrapping the Warrens' story, and if you're a longtime fan of the Conjuring series and franchise as a whole, I think you'll enjoy how things turn out by the end of the movie. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, that's just my opinion and thoughts I had about the latest entry into the Conjuring universe. And with that, if you stick to the end of this video and like to see more content like this, consider subscribing and liking for more videos like this. I'll be trying to post YouTube videos as frequently as possible, especially with the Halloween season right around the corner. But as always, guys and gals, take care.